Now it's, however, time for JB to take over and talk about VLC and Qt. Over to you.
Thanks, Jasper. Good morning. I'm Jean-Baptiste. I'm the president of the Videoland nonprofit and one of the lead developer of VLC. I've been working on VLC for long, maybe 15 years, and I've been basically starting programming on VLC. So I'm French. Sorry, no one is perfect. I'm a geek and I like developing, and I've been doing a lot of things around Videoland nonprofit, which are not just coding. So Videoland is a nonprofit organization like KDE or Mozilla. We have several projects. One of them is VLC. It's probably the best and most known one, but we are doing a lot of other things related to open source and multimedia. The Videoland project is a very weird project because it actually started a long time ago as a student project from the École Centrale Paris, which is a university at the south of Paris. And the reason this project exists is not because someone said, oh, we need to make open source multimedia. The students, you can see on your screen, for weird historical reasons, everything that was managed by the students on the campus, from the cafeteria to the pub, to the telephone system, but also the networking. And they had like a networking system that was installed in the late 80s, which was based on Token Ring. So probably not many of you still know what Token Ring is. But basically Token Ring is this very old IBM thingy where the network is not as a star with routers in the middle, but just like a big ring. And when you want to talk, you take basically the token, you put your data, and all the other computers are going to watch and see whether it's for them or not. Well, it works great when you're basically pining to read your emails. But if you want to do more, especially video games, it doesn't work well. So the students wanted to have like a new network in order to play basically video games. So we're in 1994, 1995. And well, this school said, well, sorry, but we don't have the money. And also, well, we cannot do that because the campus is yours. It's not ours. So then the students went and met a lot of like industries to see whether someone wanted to basically give them a free network. And they find a guy who was like at the French TV station TF1 and said, basically, you know what? We believe that the future of video is satellite. Well, it's not, but like in 1995, that was a good bet. And instead of like buying 1,500 decoders and 1,500 satellite dish, what about we build just a big one and then we use a network in order to stream the network, the DVB streams from the satellite. And of course, that seems obvious, but we're like 10, 12 years before YouTube. Most of the computers were 4086 or early Pentium, so doing video decoding, even SD real time on MPEG-2 was almost impossible. But they said, okay, let's do that. So they built this project. Of course, the project was just a proof of concept and crashing all the time, but it just showed that it was doable. And that was the end of this project. They had like this new shiny network based on ATM with like 100 megabits per second everywhere. And a couple years after that project, some people said, well, you know what, maybe other university or other campus care about streaming video on a local network. And they decided to do the Videoland project, which is, of course, video on the LAN. And one of the goals of that project at that time, 1999, was to make it open source. It took them around two years to convince the school to open source it because they thought they wanted to make a lot of money out of that, of course. And they thought that the copyright of the students should be there. So after a long legal battle, in 2001, the Videoland project became an open source project. And that's how we got VLC. So yeah, we got VLC because a few students in the late 90s wanted to play video games and the university didn't want to pay for the new network. So Videoland has been doing a lot of projects. VLC is the most known ones, but there is a lot of libraries. One of them is, for example, libdvdcss to open the DVD DRMs, but others like libdts, libblu-ray, libacs, the encoder X264, which is probably one of the most used video encoder in the world, and a few other software. But of course, for the main public, VLC is the biggest. This shows like the VideoLAN streaming solution. I like that slide because it was done in 2002, as you can see, because there is a VLC for familiar Linux. This is dead since a long time. But the idea has not changed a bit, right? You take any type of input, you play them, you transcode them, and you stream them on a multicast network, and you have different clients. Of course, today, most of those parts of the solutions are still working, but no one uses them. But the part which is VLC, which is both a streamer and a client, stayed. VLC, well, it's mostly known as a Kone player. You have no idea how many people come to our webpage by Googling Kone player. It's quite funny, like when I'm presenting to non-geek, I'm just saying that, I work on VLC, and they're just like, no, what is VLC? It's a software to play video. Yeah, I don't. No, yeah, the Kone that plays video. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I know that. I've been installing that forever on my machine. So it's of course completely idiotic to use a Kone for a video player, because like if you do a video player, you're just going to use a play button like YouTube or any other player. But it was a happy mistake of the students because it was in rollout, and it became like an icon. So there is no way we can change that ever in the future, because it's now so weird for a video player that is so recognizable, and it's a very important brand, while it was never designed as a brand. Yeah, so VLC became popular because it played anything. And when I mean anything, it was like really like, there are jokes where people say that you could put like vinyl directly on your CD drive and VLC is going to play them. Well, not really, but it's true that every codec can be played with VLC. At that time, in 2001, 2002, people were downloading things completely legally, of course. And there was like a ton of different codecs. It was a nightmare, especially when you were on Windows. You had to install some codec packs, and then it didn't work. So you installed new codec packs. Of course, you were installing malware and destroying your laptop. So you had to reinstall your Windows. So everything was difficult. VLC came with all the codecs embedded, right? So you could install any type of codec pack. It would not change a thing. So that's one of the reasons why VLC became quite popular, because it was able to play everything on all platforms, whether you were on Windows, on Linux, or on macOS. For a long time, for example, on macOS, there was no way to play DVDs. VLC was the only way. VLC runs everywhere. The last version still run on OS 2, which is great for the 3 people using OS 2, knowing that one of them is actually doing the port of VLC on OS 2. But it's very important because it shows that VLC is very portable, and like VLC plays everything and runs really everywhere. VLC is a large software in terms of users. We're talking about 1 million downloads per day. Of course, a lot of them are updates, but that means that we are basically between 400 and 500 million active users. And often when we discuss with the people from Microsoft or macOS, they're just telling us that VLC is one of the top 10 software used on their platform, which is quite a feat, right, compared to most of the others are really not open source software. On our website, and of course that's only on our website because it doesn't count Linux distribution or the stores or download.com or all the people redistributing. We've had 3.5 billion downloads since the early days. So I'm going to show you a few pictures of old versions of VLC. This one, if you look closely, you're going to see that it's still called VideoLAN client, which is why VLC is called VLC, because it was a client of the VideoLAN software streaming solution. That's probably a very old GNOME, and that's a James Bond DVD, because the first DVD that was played by VLC was GoldenEye. That's also why all the versions of VLC have a GoldenEye code name until 1.0. Then that was the first GTK version of VLC, which was able to play live TV directly. That was written in GTK. And then we moved, that's the first macOS version. which was also written in Aqua. You can see the shiny colors of the old macOS versions. But the one that most of the people learned and to use was the version we used from 2002, 2003 to 2009, which was based on WX widgets. WX widgets is a world of pain. It was a huge pain for us. The biggest reasons why the lack of support for Unicode for a long time, also lots of different bugs between different versions, and the support on Windows was not too good. So in 2006 or 2007, we decided to move to Qt, and we rewrote the whole interface from WX widgets to Qt 4. That's probably in 2009, the first version that was using Qt, and the current version is this one, which is the best one, of course, because it plays the ponies correctly, is still based on Qt Core. And here, we're only using Qt Core and Qt GUI and widgets, right? No, nothing else. So it's quite important to remind that as KDE, people working on VLC are volunteer and working on VLC on their free time. Some of them have had jobs that are related to that, but most of the time, those were students and then a nonprofit that I created in 2008. But everything was done by volunteer, in truly an open source project. So the nonprofit called VideoLAN was created in 2009 after we took the project out of the university because it outgrew the university, was too big. And we don't have any money. We don't hire anyone. The money is just used for servers, for travel, for legal, and organizing conferences. And that's how we roll. It's interesting that VLC became one of the most popular video player in the world. While it was not the first, right? Even on Linux, there were a lot of other players that were probably better at the time. But the architecture of VLC and the way it was done influenced a lot the way VLC is used today. Because VLC has a very small core, which is around 80,000, 100,000 lines of C, and then it has a lot of modules that basically you plug. A normal installation of VLC is around 400 to 500 modules. And depending on the OS, you don't have the same modules. This allowed us to take the best of every platform. So for example, on Windows, we output using DirectX and Direct3D and not using OpenGL. OpenGL would be the best way to have something that is cross-platform, but as anyone who has done ever OpenGL, it's a world of pain because drivers don't work and so on, right? So that's for a long time. The fact that VLC has a lot of modules means that first, it's been very light on memory because you don't load all of them at the same time. You can extend it quite easily, most of the modules, video filters are 1,000 lines of module that you can write and add. And also we use the best for every platform, which means that if you want to port VLC to another platform, you don't need to fork VLC, you just add an audio output, a video output, and maybe a new UI, which was solved for us by Qt. The other reasons why VLC was able to be ported on a lot of platforms is, sorry to say, but the lack of use of C++. We've been using C and kind of Object-C, where we've been abusing function pointers and common members in order to have a very simple inheritance. And today, that doesn't make any sense. In 1999, 2000, where the compilers were, the C++ compiler was not that good, it's very important. And there are also some platforms where not requiring a C++ compiler was important. Of course, not the one where we use the Qt interface, but for many others, it is. And also, it forced us to have a C ABI for all the modules, which is good because it allowed us to plug other languages like Lua, Objective-C, or lately Rust without having too much to change. The good thing or the bad things, depending on how you have, is that because it's easy to add features to VLC, we have a lot of completely stupid features on VLC. And because it's the abstractions are quite well done, we don't have to maintain them at all. So for example, you're going to see that we support VNC and remote desktop. in VLC. So that's like a virtual machine or VirtualBox and of macOS. And here is basically VLC playing directly the VNC and the remote desktop without installing one. Is it useful? Probably not. But because of the way we've done it, it was just like we already play audio, right? We already play video. We already have input because like you need to be able to click on DVD menus. So like adding that was easy, and probably the code has not been touched for years, but it still works, and we compile it and it still works. Other weird stuff include, of course, screencasting. Okay, so that completely useless because the screencasting of VLC is far from being the best, but it allows you to do those amazing mise en abîme, which then like you can claim on social media and say, well, look, I've found that in VLC, it's amazing, and you get a lot of karma points. The actual usage is debatable. Like if you want to do that, probably you should use OBS. Still, again, it's easy to do. It doesn't make the software rot. It's a few lines of code, and that's good. We support karaoke and MIDI because we can, maybe. We have, like, of course, versions without UI, right? Without, like, this is the NCOS version. So you could use that through SSH. And here you're going to say, of course, like, yeah, but the video, like, the video is not through SSH. Well, you know what? It actually is. There is a support of libkk, which is an ASCII output. So this is not Unicode, right? This is just ASCII output called basic ASCII, and that just allows you to play video from SSH. And here you just say that, like, this is useless. And actually, it's not. There are a lot of places where you need to do quality control on a complex network and to see if the video goes in the right place. And a lot of people like complain when we break this API and this UI, this non-UI, because like you SSH to a router and you just divert the traffic and you just play it, and that actually works. So this is usable. And we have lots of other features, like you should try the puzzle filter, where you just basically, like, it's a puzzle and the video is in puzzle and you can click and drag the pieces to build the puzzles. It's very useful if ever your girlfriend or boyfriend gives you a French movie to watch. You have time to complete the puzzle in the 2 hours. More seriously, the correct APIs and the very good splitting allowed us to move to Android quite early in the Android development, already in the Android 2.1, when Google, the first version from Google. The UI was debatable, of course, but this version of Android is probably of VLC is probably one of the most used version of VLC after the Windows version. And it works now on all Android TVs, on Chromebooks, and it's the same. And 95% of the code that is running is the same as the version you have on your normal Linux or your normal Windows. Android TV is the same. You have to know that our mobile versions don't use Qt. We can discuss about that later if some people care. iOS has been a more complex project. We've had the VLC on iOS since early times, but it was kicked out of the App Store for GPL reasons. So the version of VLC on iOS is not GPL; it's actually Mozilla Public License. And then we got kicked out by Dolby, and then we came back. It evolved quite a bit until arriving to the version that is currently in beta, which is quite different. But you should look at it, because what you see at the bottom, well, we're going to discuss about that later. We have a version that runs on the iWatch. It's completely useless because you're never going to watch your video on it, but it's really cool to show that. That doesn't go through the App Store, of course. The versions now we have on the Apple Watch is just allowing to basically play, pause, and control VLC, not play the video on the watch. Of course, versions on Apple TV, as I said. So just to give you an idea of the number, the VLC community is actually quite small. There is around 10 to 12 main core developers that are basically the reviewers. And then we have a lot of contributors from the outside, maybe around 100, 150 per year. That's probably our average. And that's only VLC, right? And then if you count the number of third-party libraries we're using, it's quite larger. But a version like VLC 3.0 is around 20,000 commits plus 3,000 on each mobile port. This version was quite long to arrive because we spent a lot of time merging the code that was used for mobile and the desktop, because we had like some small architecture difference, and all that was fixed in version 3.0. And like this one is important because like we've done basically everything that was required on that other player had, like hardware decoding by default, 360 video, 10 bits, AGR. Of course, not really on Linux, but on other platforms. And stuff like Chromecast. But this version is very stable, one of the most stable versions. We probably have already 400 or 500 millions of downloads of this version 3.0. So it's quite large and quite popular. And because it's stable, it allowed us to work on what we're going to discuss next, which is basically the new UI of VLC 4.0. So yeah, we have a version that supports VR because a few years ago, everyone was on VR. It might come back. We don't know yet. So now we're going to work on VLC 4.0. It's a large undertaking because we're changing a lot of things that we were afraid to change since a long time. So new input, new playlist, new media library, and mostly a new interface. And that's the first version where we're going to drop some old platforms, like we're finally going to drop Windows XP, and allowing to do that is going to allow us to do some better UI. So when some people are actually dropping Windows 7, we are actually dropping Windows XP. So that was a bit about the story about VLC and where we were. So now we are going to speak a bit about the new UI of VLC. So of course, the first question is like, why do you need a new UI? And that's every time people change the UI, everyone complains, and rightfully so, right? So many updates, we've always been there, where it destroys everything and nothing works anymore. So why do you need a new UI? Well, the first reason is that because we fixed most of the other important problems that we had in the VLC core. But the first reason is because our users want it. There are new usage. We've seen that a lot of people now use VLC to play back audio. And VLC, if you ever use it to play back audio, is a world of pain, right? The playlist is horrible, doesn't work well. There is no management of any metadata. On Linux, there are like a new audio player every 2 weeks, so that's not very important. But on Windows, there are not that many good audio player anymore. The best one I've basically dropped or moved to a completely Spotify, Deezer, music model where you need to basically download music and you don't have your local music. And a lot of people still use like local music and in lots of different formats. So they are using VLC. And for them, the current VLC UI is absolutely not suitable. The other thing is we are seeing more and more content-oriented things. Of course, the Netflix generation, who's only used that, they want content, right? They probably don't download stuff or share stuff with other friends, and it's difficult to find the content today. So the new version should like address that, and also what I call connected home, which is of course bullshit word, but like you have a NAS, you share between devices, you move from your tablet to your phone, then to your desktop, and you want to have the same content and it's centralized in your home. You want to basically beam to your Chromecast, and so on. So those new usage make quite a bit of change on how we must do VLC. Of course, the first thing is like, you know what, maybe don't change too much the UI for that. Sure, But we also need to converge a bit on Android and iOS to have the same kind of features, because people don't understand why they are different. And we have like set-top box or smartphones that are basically more or less desktop, and they don't have a mouse, or the mouse is not the first input. So you need to change that. And finally, like, people complain that VLC is ugly and it needs to be more modern and more beautiful. And today is probably the biggest complaint or feedback that we have from our users. So that's basically why we want to work on a new UI. But so how do you do UI? First UX without too much backlash. Sorry, but we are not GNOME or we are not Apple. We do not want any usage regression. Meaning, if you could do something in VLC in the past, you must be able to do it in a decent way. If it doesn't work, if it's not possible, that's a bug. That also means no feature removal. Yes, that means a lot more work, because you need to be sure that you don't break too much, and also you need to be able to release the new version in a very in a less aggressive version. So, for example, the old version, the version 3, is going to be supported for a long time, so we can basically move people from one to another. But there are basically two types of people who use VLC. There is classic people who are basically using Explorer, Dolphin, Finder, Nautilus, or wherever. They browse, their collection is correctly tagged and amazing, and they double-click and they launch VLC, and they have just a playback. And this is probably the main usage of VLC, and it shouldn't be broken. Even if we think that what we're going to bring with a lot of QML is going to be amazing, for them, the change should be minimal. For the other part, which is basically you launch VLC like you launch Netflix in order to watch something, then you need media library management, and you're not going to be file-based, but really content-based, like we have on Android, on iOS, on Apple TV, Android TV, and other cases. And so here there is like a big gap that was not addressed, and we need to have those two use cases, which are different UX and do different user scenarios, different personas who are not using VLC in the same way. So we're going to support both, and we need to be sure that both are supported. And linked to that is basically what I call the hierarchy of access. I said no feature removal, sure, but that doesn't mean they are going to be exposed in the same way. For example, the common action should be easier to access. Today, to change audio track or subtitle track in VLC, you need to go to the menu bar, which is at the top, click on one menu, go on a sub-menu, and then a third sub-menu, and click on that. While this is probably the most, at least as a French person, this is the biggest action I'm doing on my video player. So this should be a one-click, right? And if you see everything that is done by Netflix or Amazon, all those basically web-based players, subtitles and audio tracks are one click. So those must be first action and not hidden. But some of the complex action are always possible today in the toolbar of VLC. Well, almost no one uses them. So there is no reason to do that. So we've listed all the actions and made, okay, those are first priority, so one click, less priority, 2 clicks, and weirder stuff are on the third click. But the decision is to not remove things, right? So they will be a bit more hidden, but they will still be accessible. And because of all that, we hope that we are not going to have too much of a backlash. Of course, I don't believe that too much, because people complain all the time. People we'll talk about that later, but users can be extremely aggressive. So it's difficult because, as I said, different usage, and some of them are conflicting, right? The audio use case or the video use case, the browsing files to content are different. So usage is difficult to on a UX and product point of view. But also, we're on a lot of platforms, and even on the same platform like Windows 7 or Windows 10, we need to be able to compose video and widgets, and it's not always simple. And of course, like Linux is a pain between Wayland and X11 and client-side declaration and server-side declaration and so on. And we are not going to fight. We are not good enough, and we are not amazing at UI and UX. So we want to feel native on the platform. Therefore, we'll do a bit more work, we'll try to do something a bit more abstract, but you want server-side decoration, so be it, I don't care. But supporting all that requires more work and more conception. We have also a big issue, which is Qt. Qt 4 is, of course, completely outdated, but in Qt 5, Qt Widget has not evolved enough. So there are a lot of things that we cannot do easily. And then you get Qt 5 and QML, which is very slow. Like, we hope to make that better, but currently, like the nightly build versions of VLC are unusable because of how slow QML is. And on our very specific use case, basically, video and Qt don't mix well. If you want to have like good video with good HDR, well, Qt can only overlay the control and not do anything else. And unfortunately, this is very difficult because that means you need to basically have two windows and talk to your compositor in order to lay one over the other, because on your video, you don't want Qt to display your video, you want your compositor to output the video because of G-Sync or FreeSync and many other stuff, but also being able to talk directly to HDMI to be able to send the HDR metadata. A lot of stuff like that requires that if you want to have like perfect quality, Qt is not the best solution. And finally, as I said, no one is employed by the nonprofit, so we have resources that are quite limited. So I'm going to show you some designs, which are the design we want. Those screenshots are the Windows 10 theme. So don't tell me it doesn't work on Linux, because I know this is a Windows 10 version, right? So it means that we will have like different icons, different fonts, and probably different integration, but at least the things should be in the same places. So you can see here the video player. Of course, we have like this is Windows 10, so it's client-side decoration for the close and reduction of the menu. All that is overlay above the video, and when your mouse is out, you have nothing but just the video. The player at the bottom in the normal version of VLC can be customized. So you can remove buttons, add buttons, change buttons, because we've always done like that. So you should be able to recreate mostly your VLC 3.0 player. This is the audio player. As you can see, most of these things have not changed from the video to the audio player. The text, the buttons at the top are the same. The button in the player are also the same. Just two buttons change, and of course the main UI changes. And those two cases where you basically the cases where you double click and it just opens. So now we are going to talk about the other part, which is basically browsing your collection, and which is going to be, of course, the most difficult part to get right. And this is mostly the part where we actually need QML, because it's a lot of reflowing, which we used to do in the past, but it was very annoying to do directly with Qt widgets. And of course, we need to be able to scale, to zoom, to adapt to IDPI. So this is mostly what it's going to look like for the video case. Let's decompose a bit what is happening on the UI. On the top, in the center, I don't know if you see my mouse, but you're going to see basically the four main use case of VLC, or the four main universe. The first one is basically browsing video, right? Like that's a video player. The second part is music. It's probably something related to, for example, iTunes or Amarok. The third one is related to browsing everything that is local, your NAS, the devices that are basically plugged to your machine, your DVDs that automatically pop up over there. So basically, it's browsing files and browsing devices or your local network in a non-indexed versions, while the first two, video and music, are going to be mostly like pre-indexed music, an actual media library. And the last one is basically third-party content from the web in a completely autonomous versions, right? People can add their own sources to play any type of video. Today, it's doable in VLC, but it's very well hidden. And under that, you have basically, so this is basically the main menu that is everywhere. And then you have a sub-menu. So for music, it's artist, album, tracks, genre, playlist. For video, it's going to be like video, TV shows, and so on, which is basically like a sub specification. But basically, you select whether you want to do video and audio, and then this is basically just a change of the UI. On the left, you're going to always have like changes that are going to change the view, like list or grid. How do you sort? But basically, it's not changing anything. And on the right are the buttons that are present on all the views, which is basically the main menu, the old Q menu, the playlist, where you can basically pop from the right side, and a global search. And this is common to basically all the views. If your close, open, minimize buttons on the other side, well, basically the back buttons goes down, and they are on the left side. If you have client side, if you prefer server side decoration, basically those don't appear and they appear above it. Or if you want to have, because you like old menus in the old ways and you want to still have the old Q menus, you basically have the option, and these buttons will be hidden, and then you have the menu that arrives here. Then at the bottom, when there is playback, you have like basically a mini player that shows and comes from the bottom. And on the side, you have basically the playlist or the play queue that is toggled by the button that is always present. If you've seen like 2 slides before, it's also present during the video player, so you can have like the playlist coming from the side. And finally, the part that I've of course hidden is a browsing, because it depends on where you are. It can be very simple, like the video that I showed, to be quite complex view, like the artist view, which is going to be the most complex. Because you click on music, then you click on artist, then you should select the artist you want, and then you have like all their albums, and when you click on one, then it spawns. So this one is the most complex view we have, and as you can see, it's not that bad if we manage to arrive to that result. So of course, what you've seen so far are the screenshot of the design that we want to achieve. We are not yet there. So let me show what we've actually done so far. So what we've done is, of course, move to Qt, move to QML, have the Qt widgets for the old dialogue still working, and for the menus, but also be ready for QML, for the main view, for the playlist we've used to QML, for the browsing that are using QML. Some of the work was done during GSOC this summer, some was done before. Some of it is still not there, so not merged, but let's see what we have. So as you can see, most of the big things are ready and working. There is a lot of UI to fix and to get to the right to the design. There is, as you can see here, there is a client-side, a server-side decoration. It's not completely done because of composition between between video and QML on Windows. This is a player. Well, as you can see, most of the buttons are around here, but not all of them. And this is like music. Also still on Windows, and you see that the mini player is at the bottom. The play queue is correctly done, but as you can see, the play button is not centered yet. So, I mean, those are actually screenshots that I took just like 2 hours ago to be sure that like I'm not lying and I'm showing exactly what we have. So, as you can see, there is a lot of work yet to be done, but we're on it.
Thank you very much. Interesting stuff. We have a bunch of questions here, so let's just get started here. Nils is asking, is there a reason why there is not a Qt-based VLC Android player? And follow up with, what do you think of RS Atom and QML VLC?
So there are players based on Qt on Android using VLC, but Qt on Android is not there yet. It's not good. There are too many bugs, so it's not. And the difficult part on Android is not to be able to have like some UIs integration with the rest of the system, the notification, the and all that is not there now on Qt on Android. So you have to do it by yourself. The question about RS Atom and QML VLC, well, the problem is that what he's doing is taking the video and then copying it into a buffer, a QML buffer, and that's not the most efficient way of doing it. And which means that higher CPU and higher GPU usage, which is not what we want. We want to have like the best platform. So not for us.
Okay. Nils also asked, I don't understand the Qt and video don't mix statement. What specifically is the problem?
So the problem is that Qt has basically its rendering loop like a video game, right? That doesn't work for video. Video, you have to display a frame at a specific time, and therefore you need to talk to specific APIs on Windows, for example, DXGI, and you need to synchronize with vsync. You need to synchronize with other places, and so you don't want Qt to do that. So in the past, it was easy, right? We had like we used Qt widget, and the main video widget was a native widget and not an alien widget. So we call WinID very early. So we got an actual ID, and then the video output is actually streaming this inside an actual widget, which is a Windows widget with an HWND or XID on Linux. QML makes that very difficult to do. So we have to basically have like a layer, which is the actual window, which is the video, and then a QML Qt window, which is another one. But because there are two windows, you need to move them together, which means you need to tell your compositor that they are the same. So you can do a video player with QML and Qt. It works. If you want to do a good one, you cannot.
Which of course brings up the question, why are you even moving to QML then? Why not stay with Qt widget?
Well, because Qt widgets have a lot of bugs. They have lots of HDPI issues. And most of the things that you've seen on our content is basically list-based, right? So you need to have basically lists. And we used to have lists on the old playlist with Qt and the models and so on. That was extremely painful. And if you need to have stuff like, oh, I want to control and scroll to make it bigger at 110% or 120%, you want to reflow, you want to move from one video to another one display to another one, then QML is better.
Okay.
So that's quite interesting because we're still using widgets, right? We're using both, right? Mm-hmm. All dialogues are basically Qt widgets, and they are still there. I remember a discussion with Till from KLab at some point, I remember. And I was just like, no, we are not moving everything to QML. We're moving the main views, which are playlist and content browsing, to QML. And we're doing also that for the video, the overlay of the video, but a lot of the code is still on Qt widgets.
Can you give me an idea of how much code we're talking about that's still on Qt widgets?
So VLC, as I said, everything is a module. The Qt interface is a module. The Qt interface is maybe 25 to 30,000 lines of code. Mm-hmm. And currently, there is maybe, in the next version, there is still maybe 20,000 lines of Qt widgets, okay. Right? But it's like very separated.
Fair enough. The next question is, I don't know if you were in Sergio's presentation yesterday on a doc widget, but Sergio has one of his claims to fame, he has many, is the new KDE doc widget system. And I'm sure that what he's asking here is actually a support question for you, so you can help him out with his problems here. He's asking, and I think he's referring to your frameless Windows decoration there. He's asking, is that using Qt frameless Windows hint, or are you painting over the native window title bar?
I think now we're using frameless window hint, but as you've seen on the screenshot, this is a part where we are not ready yet to be at the best. So nothing is set in stone, right? Like we need to fix things and get better. So we'll do that.
There's a guy from YouTube asking, are all the advanced features like conversions still going to be there?
Yes, of course. And for example, one of the, currently, if you convert videos with VLC, it's taking over your playback. So it makes no sense, right? Because if you have a loop button and you start recording or transcoding, it's just going to do it over and over because it's the main playlist. While now with the whole work, I'm going to have a different playlist, which is basically my conversion queue. And because of the work we've done in the core and in the UI, well, there will be the playlist and the conversion queue. So you can unqueue a lot of conversions and they're going to be there and it's going to be a lot easier. And also because it's more content-based than file-based, you can say, well, transcode me this file, and you don't care if it's over several files, DVD or something else, you want to transfer that. And this UI should make that a lot easier.
Okay. And please forgive me if any of the questions here have already been answered. They were
don't worry.
A long time ago. So the next one here, do you have a problem with GPU batches with your QML interfaces?
I think so, yes, a lot. Like currently, if you test the nightly build, for example, there is a lack of recycle view like we have on Android, and everything is just like laggy and difficult. But no idea whether it's us doing something wrong, which is possible, right? Like we probably suck at QML compared to some of the people who've been using QML since a long time. But I think we do, and also the compositor, the way the renderers from Qt are, let's say, not so good, especially on Windows.
Here's a more generic Qt question, I guess. Don't you lose one of the advantages of Qt if you are doing a front end for every platform?
No, because like those front ends are not really front end. They are just like basically a small skin to fit GNOME, KDE, and Windows. There is no most of the code is going to be the same. The icons can be different. Like it doesn't change the code, right? So it's just a question of packaging. So no, it should. Like this is a good thing is there is not much code. The compositing is of course the biggest platform specific code, and the title bar I don't know yet, but it's going to be a mess. I'm sure of that.
I'm sure it will. Stan is asking, do you run into garbage collection issues with QML?
Probably. I like today the UI you can test the nightly bliss for Windows. It's too slow, so maybe. Again, if you know, tell us because like we're learning.
David is asking how much can be shared or is shared between each of the platform and how much is custom for each platform.
So I think I mostly answered that. So yeah, the whole VLC 95% of the code compile is common. Then there is 5% which are basically UI and audio and video. And using Qt, I think that most of the code is going to be exactly the same on Windows and Linux. And on Linux, we want to have a version that looks good on GNOME and a version that looks good on KDE. So pretty much all of it.
Carl is asking, did you look at Elisa?
Of course we did. There. And if you look at some of my screenshots, you can see that there is a lot of inspiration from Elisa, a lot of inspiration from my old Amarok that I loved. Yes, there is. I think there are things I disagree with the Elisa designs, but like we are talking about very small things. And even when we are going to the first main version with the new QML interface, I think that we have a long road to have lots of features. Because when you start looking at video players, audio players like Elisa, you realize that there is a lot of UI, a lot of buttons, a lot of right-click menus and so on, which are difficult to get right. The important for us was first to have like a good framework and concept and have like those buttons are always here, those are here, whatever you're using it for audio, for video, for so on. And that was the difficult part. And then we'll need to iterate. I don't think we will be finished this UI for a long time.
And looking at what other people do is not stealing, that is getting inspired.
Well, isn't like copying the best form of flattery or something like that?
Indeed. Sergio again is asking, would you recommend Qt Multimedia for someone?
No. Never,
So-
ever, 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 ever.
If I were to do an application that was that needed some video playback in it, I
Use
assume,
VLC or use Qt VLC. It works very well.
so how much line of, I mean, if I use multimedia, it's basically just create a widget and voila.
Same for VLC.
But
VLC.
how much code are we talking about?
I think the demo of Qt VLC in our repository is less than 100 lines of C or C++, and you have Qt. Sorry, yeah.
That's pretty good. There's a question: is it all open source? All your code in there?
Yeah, of course. Everything is so the core of VLC is LGPL v2 or later, and the UI is GPL v2.
How much of your success do you contribute to?
No idea. It's very difficult to answer. The sad thing is, and also the good thing, right? Like people use VLC because it works, not because it's open source. So like I think that less than 99.99999% of VLC users have no idea what open source is and no idea what Qt is. So it's difficult to know your users when you have like such a large and, sorry to say, uneducated code base and user base.
But on the other hand, a commercial application, I guess your chances on getting on many of the platforms would have been less. So how do you see that?
Well, I'm not sure it's related to Qt. It's mostly related to the core VLC design. On macOS, we are still not using Qt. On iOS, we're not using Qt. On Android, we're not using Qt. But what is sure is that the fact that Qt 4 was and Qt Widget was very good on Windows helped us a lot, because none of us were actually developing on Windows. And I think that's very important.
Okay. I don't think I see more questions. Again, thank you very much, JB.
Thanks.